But I'm gonna tell you about some times that I actually was really freaked out on public transportation, and I understood why people can get scared. So I have this one friend, and she's visiting me from the country. Okay, so she lives in the middle of nowhere. And so she's used to driving everywhere. So she visits me, and we are going out in the city. We want to go dancing, but before that, we go get dinner. So we end up going to Williamsburg. And if you're watching and you don't know where Williamsburg is like one of the first northernest parts of Brooklyn. And Williamsburg used to be a bit more like rough, pre-gentrification. But ever since like, the last decade, Williamsburg is super nice. It's really expensive. Rents go between like $4,000 to $5,000. Condos are like 2 million plus. It's really probably more than that even. My point being that people who are living in Williamsburg are super affluent. It isn't a dangerous place. Yeah. It's like so she comes, she's visiting, and then we're finishing up for dinner. It's like maybe 8, 9, and she's like, "Oh, I don't think like we should walk in the streets after 9. Like, I think we should take an Uber, or maybe I should drive." And I'm like, "Are you kidding? Williamsburg is super safe. Like, nothing's gonna happen to you here." And so I thought that was like a little bit like paranoid. And then I have this other friend. She also will refuse to take the subway. She lives in Upper East Side. Upper East Side, it's only old ladies and dogs, okay? It's not dangerous at all. It's probably like it's a boring place actually. Like there's nothing that goes on there. It's all like old people. You also will only take cabs or Ubers back home, and I'm like, you live right near a subway. Like you could just take the subway and walk home. Like it's not like, and so yes, there are people that just are a little like paranoid, and they just like refuse to like put themselves outside their comfort zone. So, and I talked to people who lived in New York during like the 80s, the 90s, the times when it was a little bit more rough, and they told me, they were like, listen, how the subway and public transport is now, it reminds us of those really scary, dangerous, rough times before the city got like cleaned up by Giuliani. And by cleaned up, he just like pushed the undesirable populations out to different like areas, different boroughs. He didn't really like clean it up. He just sort of like moved everything to a different area. It's like, okay, so for a story. So I am on the bus. I'm taking the bus to go cross town, and I sit on the bus. It's probably like 3/4 full, just chilling. It's like a summer day, it's hot. Everyone's sort of like keeping to themselves. 2 people get on the bus. One guy, he goes and he pays, sits down. The guy that's with him, the second guy, he tries to follow him and sit on the bus like near his friend. He doesn't pay. The bus driver is like, "Hey man, you have to pay. You can't just sit down." And the guy was like, "Nah man, screw you. I'm not gonna pay. I'm gonna sit down. What are you gonna do about it?" Then this bus driver started to get heated, and he was just like, "No, you need to pay." Then the other guy's like, "No, I'm not gonna pay. Make me pay." And all of a sudden it started escalating, and then these guys are like yelling at each other, the bus driver and this guy who refuses to pay. And they're like screaming, and it's like getting really aggressive, and everybody on the bus is just like, what's going on? What's happening? And they're trying to get involved, being like, "No man, you need to stop. No, like leave him alone." But that's getting them more and more riled up. And then there's this person in the bus who she's handicapped. She has the headphones on. I think she's like not able to deal with loud noises. She starts freaking out. She's like rocking back and forth. And then everyone on the bus is like, "Hey man, no, there's like this kid here. Like, you gotta cool it down. Like this, and it was way too hot for this. It's like a hot New York City summer day. Like we do not want this like aggressive, like fight happening on the bus." And yeah, these 2 guys screaming. And then somebody was just like, I think somebody just like ended up paying for this guy's fare. And it just, stopped. But that's like, and that's what I'm seeing is just like there's this level of aggression that people are bringing onto subways and buses. And previously, I think like people just were more chill. They were respectful of each other and just respected people's personal space. And I just feel like ever since pandemic, a lot of like the social contracts and the social niceties people have with each other have decreased, and there's like this rise of antisocial behavior where people are more individualistic and they don't mind like screaming at each other, getting into fights. It's like, I mean, and there's also the rise of mental illness in the city, and honestly, for that, it's just I feel bad because there's this lack of care for people who are mentally ill or who have drug addictions. But yeah, you'll just see like this aggression, you'll see a lot of aggression just pop up. So another time, a subway story. So I'm riding on the subway, I get into the car, it's completely empty. So I sit down in the subway car and it's empty, right? And then maybe 2 stops later, 2 people get on. So they get onto the empty car, and mind you, there is a whole subway car of places where they could sit, right? Like they could choose to sit anywhere, but they choose to sit next to me. And I'm like, okay, like there's a whole car to go to, okay, whatever. So they choose to sit next to me. I don't know why. And then, so we're just riding. A couple minutes later, one of the guys takes out like a black pouch. He takes out the black pouch, he zips it, and inside the pouch there is a glass vial, and there's a needle next to it. I only saw this because they were literally like sitting next to me. So one of the guys takes it out and he starts like, hitting the needle, and I could tell like they were getting ready to shoot up. Like that was heroin, right? Like they had heroin with them and they were gonna shoot up on the subway train. At this point, there's no one else with me, like, and the conductor is like, I don't know where, and I'm just like, okay, I have to leave. So as soon as there's like stops every like couple minutes. So at the next stop, I got up, I walked out of the car, and I just went to another car. So yeah, I was not gonna be like in an empty subway car with people shooting up. Like I feel it's like, putting yourself in a potentially dangerous situation. But yeah, and speaking of shooting up, like I do see a lot of like open drug use, and I get it, like, addiction. I'm not trying to say anything negative against addiction. I think that addiction is a disease, and I also have empathy, like people relief and running from the pain in their life any way possible. And once addiction gets a hold of you, it's hard to go out, but like it's very out in the open. I'm seeing a lot of people like shooting up in the middle of the street, like very out in the open. I see, like there was once I was in a park and I saw somebody like shooting up in a park when there was like all these kids around, like running, and I was like, okay, this was a little bit like a lot, right? And I was like, okay, well, okay, so this is another subway story. So this was actually right before the pandemic hit. So at this time, I lived in a place that was, at the end of the subway line. And my friend was having her birthday party. And I was living in order to get to the birthday party, I had to go all the way downtown. So I was living like past South Bronx and that area. So South Bronx is really sketchy. Like people tell me like do not walk on the streets like after a certain time. People get stabbed, people get into fights, there's a lot of like violence, and it's not somewhere you like walk out by yourself. So I took the subway down. The party is done at like 3 a.m. So when the party finished, I was like, okay, I have to go home, right? So I get on the subway to go home. And when I told this later to people, they were like, oh my God, you should have taken Uber. Like this is the time when you should have taken Uber. 3 a.m. going through like South Bronx. You should go on the Uber. But like for some reason, I don't know, I was just like, you know what, screw it. I just want to go home. Let me just take the subway. And then as soon as I, get to near where I am, like, and I leave the subway station, I'll take an Uber. I won't walk outside by myself. I will take an Uber from the subway station to my home, but I'm not going to take an Uber like all the way. And what ended up happening was I'm sitting in the subway car and there's no one really there, and it's late at night and it's it's, you know, it's going deeper and deeper in past certain areas that are like getting very sketchy. So we're going through the South Bronx now. A woman ends up getting on the subway and she sees me, she sits next to me and she's like, you should not be on the subway. I shouldn't be on the subway. Like, she just finished like some kind of acting shoot and it was finished at like 4 in the morning. She was like a background actor. She was telling me about that and she was just like, yeah, I take the subway home. Usually like my husband picks me up, but he was not able to pick me up. So I'm taking the subway, but like we really shouldn't be there, but let's just sit together so we can protect each other just from like, because we're two girls and we were the only women on this subway, right? Like, so we're riding on the subway and then like kind of like 20 minutes later, one guy takes something out of his pocket and he puts it in his mouth and he starts lighting it up. He was smoking something. Now, I don't know what he was smoking. It didn't smell like tobacco, but he was just smoking something. And the smoke was sort of like filling up the subway. And this other guy was getting really angry that the subway started getting really smoky. And he's like, he got up and he's like, hey man, you need to put that out. And the other guy's like, no, I'm not gonna do this. And he like came at him, like, you know, he got really angry and he was like kind of coming at him, and the other guy was like trying to come back, and it was like they were throwing hands at each other and they started like scuffling and like pushing each other and doing all this like bravado and machismo. And we're like, oh my god, like what happens if somebody has a gun? You know, this is the kind of thing that like escalates. Fortunately, you know, they just sort of like hit each other, and then the other guy just stopped and he'd rather just like, you know, he just put out what he was smoking, and that was the end of that. But I was like, I was like, oh my god, I really don't want to be like in the middle of a fight on the subway cars. Oh, and one final story that just popped into my mind about being on the subway. So another time I was coming from a concert. I was coming home from a concert, and the subway station is really close to the concert hall. So everyone who was at that show got up and entered the subway together. We all kind of got on the same car, like the middle car of the subway. So we get in the car, and there isn't that many people there. There are some people who are riding there before. One thing to note was there was this man and he was lying across like 3 of those subway seats, completely like blitzed out of his mind. He was drunk. Like you can smell the whiskey and the alcohol that's coming out of his pores. Like he smelt wasted, and he's just sort of like lying there. And he's lying there. He has like a bottle that's like almost finished in one of his hands. He has other empty bottles around him. He's super drunk, and he's just mumbling. He's just mumbling himself, like drunk out of his mind, just saying like nonsensical things. Nobody could understand what he was saying. Just really drunk. And the sad thing is, like, that is so common to see in the subways. That itself wasn't alarming. We were all just like, okay, just you kind of like work around it. You just pretend you don't see what's actually happening. So anyways, drunk out of his mind. All of a sudden he starts like saying like really weird things. Like he starts like just saying like aggressive things and aggressive stuff. And he's just like, they're watching me, you know, don't trust anyone. Like I'm a target. They're out to get you. And he was just saying like these kind of paranoid things, and everyone just like looks at each other kind of like, are you hearing what I'm hearing? But anyways, again, like this is still not at the alarm level where people are like, you know, we have to do something. And all of a sudden he starts mumbling, and he was saying like under his breath, but it was loud enough so everyone could hear him, and this was like the whole subway car could hear him. He was saying like, gotta kill them all, gonna kill them all, like they'll get what they deserve, I'm gonna kill them all. And all of a sudden everyone just like looked at each other, and so we looked at each other like freaking out. And then at the next stop, again, the stop was like 2 minutes later, everyone like got up and they walked to the next car. So yeah, those are my sketchy subway stories that I'm remembering off the top of my head. There were other weird things that have happened that I didn't feel